Why does the United States have so much influence over the global economy? Most people think the answer is simple. It's military, nuclear weapons, advanced technology, or the size of its economy. And yes, all of those things matter, but there is another reason that rarely gets discussed, and most people don't even know about it properly. A powerful financial system that was created decades ago and helped keep the US dollar at the center of global trade. It is called the petrodollar. It's simple. Petro comes from petroleum, and dollar simply means the US dollar. Now think about it. Every country needs energy to run factories, cars, airplanes, and even generate electricity. In many ways, the entire global economy depends on it. Now, imagine if the world's most important resource could only be bought using US dollars. Obviously, the demand for dollars would always remain high. And who controls the dollar? The United States. That gives the US a huge advantage in the global economy. This is the reason why today's countries like China, Russia, India, Brazil, and several others are exploring ways to reduce their dependence on the US dollar in international trade. So, what exactly is the petrodollar? How does it work? And why is it so controversial? Let's break it down in the simplest way possible. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the petrodollar system is connected to global trade, geopolitics, and economic power. But before we understand the petrodollar, we first need to understand how the global monetary system worked before. Chapter 1. Before the petrodollar. For a long time, gold was considered the foundation of money. It was rare, difficult to find, and almost everyone trusted. But there was one problem. Carrying gold everywhere was not practical. Imagine trying to buy things or conduct international trade using heavy gold bars. It would be slow, risky, and inconvenient. So governments came up with a simple solution. Instead of carrying gold, people could use paper money. But there was a catch. That paper money was backed by gold. That means if you deposited a gold bar in a bank, the bank would give you a paper note saying, "This paper represents the value of 1 gold bar." People trusted the paper because they knew they could exchange it for real gold whenever they wanted. This system is called the gold standard. For years, this system worked well, but then World War II happened and everything changed. The balance of power in the global economy began shifting toward the United States. Chapter 2. How World War II Made America Rich. As the war continued, most European countries were struggling. Economies collapsed, cities were destroyed, and many nations were running out of money and gold. And it wasn't just Europe. The war was also causing destruction across large parts of Asia. Meanwhile, the United States was far from the main battlefields, so its factories continued producing weapons, food, fuel, and other important supplies for Allied countries. To pay for these supplies, many countries sent large amounts of gold to the United States. As a result, by 1944, the US held around 70% of the world's official gold reserves. And because gold was still the foundation of the global financial system, this gave the United States enormous influence over the future of money. At the same time, World War II was coming to an end, and the world needed a new financial system. So in 1944, leaders from 44 countries gathered in a small town called Bretton Woods to decide the future of the global economy. Chapter 3. The Bretton Woods Agreement. In 1944, leaders from 44 countries gathered in a small town called Bretton Woods in the United States. At that time, the war had already destroyed infrastructure, economies, and international trade. So the world needed a new financial system to rebuild. Since the United States was the richest country in the world and held around 70% of the world's gold reserves, it was in the strongest position to lead this new system. So, the United States proposed using the US dollar as the center of the global financial system. In return, it promised that 35 US dollars could be exchanged for 1 ounce of gold at any time. This meant the dollar was backed by gold, and then other countries linked their currencies to the US dollar. Let's understand this with a simple example. Imagine France wants to buy coffee from Brazil. Before Bretton Woods, both countries might need to deal with gold directly or figure out how to exchange their currencies with each other. But what if Brazil doesn't accept France's currency? So doing business becomes complicated and slow. But under the new system, things became much simpler. Step 1. France exchanges its currency for US dollars. Step 2. France uses those US dollars to buy coffee from Brazil. Step 3. Brazil accepts the dollars because it can be exchanged for gold through the United States. So instead of every country relying directly on gold, they could simply use US dollars for international trade. This was the basic idea behind the Bretton Woods system. And because countries all around the world started doing this, the demand for US dollars kept growing. Slowly, the dollar was no longer just America's currency. It was becoming the world's currency. Chapter 4. How the Bretton Woods System Failed. For nearly 25 years, the Bretton Woods system worked surprisingly well. Countries trusted the US dollar because they believed it could always be exchanged for gold. But slowly, a problem started to appear. The United States began spending huge amounts of money on government programs, military operations, and international commitments. To pay for all of this, more and more dollars were being printed. At first, nobody worried. But then countries started asking a simple question. If every dollar can be exchanged for gold, does America actually have enough gold for all those dollars? Let's understand this with a simple example. Imagine a bank has 100 gold bars in its vault. Based on those 100 gold bars, it issues 100 paper notes. Everything is fine. But later, the bank starts issuing 200 notes while still having only 100 gold bars. Now there is a problem. If everyone comes to exchange their notes for gold at the same time, the bank won't have enough gold. Because the bank has issued an extra 100 paper notes without any gold bar backing them, that's exactly what happened to the United States. Countries became nervous. Some countries started exchanging their dollars for real gold. As more countries did this, America's gold reserves began shrinking. Then came a historic moment. On August 15, 1971, U.S. President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement. The United States would no longer exchange dollars for gold. Just like that, the link between the dollar and gold was broken. This event is popularly known as the Nixon Shock. The world was shocked, and the dollar became unstable. For the first time, the global financial system was running on a dollar that was no longer backed by gold. Many people believed the dollar's dominance was about to end. But what happened next surprised everyone. Instead of becoming weaker, the dollar became even more powerful. Because the United States found something that the entire world needed even more than gold: oil. And that is where the story of the petrodollar truly begins. Chapter 5. The Birth of Petrodollar. After the Nixon shock, the United States needed something to support the dollar. Without strong demand for dollars, America's economic influence could weaken over time. At the same time, another important region was attracting global attention: the Middle East. The region had some of the largest oil reserves in the world, but it was also facing serious political tensions, conflicts, and security concerns. So, the United States saw a big opportunity. In the 1970s, the US reached a deal with Saudi Arabia. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil in US dollars. In return, the United States would provide security support and military cooperation. And because Saudi Arabia was one of the largest oil producers in the world, many other oil-producing nations followed a similar approach. Now think about it. If India wanted to buy oil, it needed US dollars. If Japan wanted to buy oil, it needed US dollars. If Brazil wanted to buy oil, it needed US dollars. Suddenly, countries around the world needed dollars before they could buy the world's most important energy resource. And this system became known as the petrodollar. Now, the dollar was linked to one of the world's most important resources, oil. Chapter 6: How Oil Created Endless Demand for Dollars. Now let's see why the petrodollar system became so powerful. Imagine Brazil wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Brazil first needs US dollars. Brazil uses those dollars to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia now has a large amount of US dollars. But here's the interesting part. Saudi Arabia doesn't just keep those dollars locked in a vault. It invests a large portion of those dollars in American stocks, businesses, and government bonds. In simple terms, many oil-producing nations were sending billions of petrodollars back into the US financial system. This gave the United States access to huge amounts of capital, helping it invest in its economy, businesses, and military. So the dollars were turned back to the United States. Then those same dollars flowed back into the global economy and were used again to buy oil. And the cycle repeated. This created a continuous demand for US dollars. This is what made the petrodollar system so powerful. Chapter 7: America's Hidden Advantage. Now we arrive at the most important part of the story. Why do some people call the petrodollar system one of America's greatest economic advantages? The answer is simple. When the entire world needs your currency, you gain benefits that most countries don't have. As the dollar became the world's most important currency, countries around the world started holding large amounts of US dollars, US assets, and US government bonds. This made the US dollar deeply connected to the global economy. As a result, changes in the US economy, interest rates, government policies, or even major election results can affect markets and economies across the world. The dollar's global role also gave the United States significant financial influence. Since a large portion of international trade and financial transactions are conducted in dollars, U.S. sanctions on a country or a company or a bank can make international business more difficult. And this is where the controversy begins. Some people believe the world should rely on multiple major currencies instead of just one. So it would create a more balanced and diversified global trading system. And that's why some countries have started looking for alternatives to the dollar. Chapter 8: Is the petrodollar dying? Today, the petrodollar system is facing challenges that didn't exist a few decades ago. Some countries are trying to reduce their dependence on the US dollar by trading in their own currencies. For example, China and Russia have increased trade using their local currencies. At the same time, BRICS countries have been discussing ways to increase trade without depending so heavily on the US dollar. This movement is often called de-dollarization. Some people believe this could weaken the petrodollar system in the future. But does that mean the dollar is about to lose its dominance? Not necessarily. As of 2026, the majority of global trade, foreign reserves, and international financial transactions are still heavily connected to the US dollar. So the petrodollar may not be disappearing anytime soon. What we're seeing is not the sudden death of the dollar, but a gradual attempt by some countries to create alternatives. Whether those alternatives succeed or not remains one of the biggest economic questions of the 21st century. The petrodollar helped transform the US dollar from a national currency into a global one. For more than 50 years, it has shaped international trade, economics, and global influence. Will it remain dominant in the future? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the next chapter of the petrodollar story is still being written.